Hello, everybody. Sorry for not having sound, but it's a good sign because we had the best our seminars when we don't have a music under the film. So hello everybody. Chciałem wszystkich serdecznie powitać na kolejnym naszym spotkaniu. Chciałem serdecznie przeprosić za to, że nie było dźwięku, ale poprawimy to. Będzie na końcu, puścimy jeszcze raz film, na pewno z wdziękiem również, ale raczej z dźwiękiem, chciałem powiedzieć. Chciałem serdecznie powitać naszych gości, chciałem serdecznie powitać Państwa. Jest nam niezmiernie miło, że widzimy się po raz 15 już w tej chwili. Mamy znowu niesamowitego gościa. Naszym gościem jest G Jacobides, fantastyczny człowiek. Dzisiaj opowie nam o tym, jak tworzyć ekosystemy. My oczywiście ekosystemy tworzymy od 20 lat, takie tworzymy, że do tej pory nam nie wychodzą, więc może wreszcie się czegoś nauczymy, ale małymi krokami dochodzimy do tego, że jest coraz lepiej. Naszym moderatorem też będzie bardzo zacny człowiek, Krzysztof Klincewicz, który też się na ekosystemach zna i myślę, że też wniesie bardzo dużą wartość do naszych prezentacji. A teraz, żeby już nie przedłużać mojej smutnej gadaniny, chciałem powitać naszych gości. Okay, so Krzysztof, the Zoom floor is yours.
Thank you, Bartosz. So it's a pleasure to welcome all of you on behalf of Industrial Development Agency. As you've heard, my name is Krzysztof Klincewicz. I'm professor of innovation management at University of Warsaw. Our executive MBA program is partner of this webinar, and I'm really excited to host today Professor Michael Jacobides from London Business School. As you hopefully already know, because you must have read a lot about Professor Jacobides before joining today's session. He is Sir Donald Gordon Chair of Entrepreneurship and Innovation and Strategy at London Business School, so the leading business school in Europe and in the UK. His background, when you think about the specific area of research, Bartosz already mentioned ecosystems, but it's more about also architecture of various industries, issues of value migration, platforms, ecosystems. I'm pretty sure that this is exactly what Michael is going to cover in today's session. And one particularly interesting thing is that there's been a lot of discussion about ecosystems and platforms in the context of information and communication technologies. But what Michael is doing, he sort of transplanted this concept to a number of other industries, like, for example, insurance. And it probably comes all down to his also industrial exposure, so experiences with such a variety of organizations like World Economic Forum, Boston Consulting Group, New York Fed, and a number of industrial players. So I'm looking forward to hearing a lot about how ecosystems link to the broad topic of open innovations that we all work towards, how those ecosystems could be enabled by technologies, and how modularity and complementarities could boost our creativity. So Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be with you. It's fun to engage in a new format. I will pretend I understood what was said in Polish. I have absolutely no clue. What I was saying is that although quite often we give keynotes for corporates and events and so on and so forth, all I was asking is for people to consider donating, and there's a link to donations in terms of COVID fight. And since I'm based in Greece right now, I thought that we'd support the local health system. Now, with that, let me speak about the exciting stuff, what I think is happening and is changing the way that the world is competing. And what I thought that I would do is twofold. I'm going to give you a very brief version of what I would introduce the topic as. Don't worry, not much academic. And then I'm going to take you through a little bit more systematic framework. And as Christoph was saying, I also do engage with a number of organizations, both non-for-profits or large organizations like Wherefore, the New York Fed, where I'm a visiting scholar, but also not only consultancies like BCG, where I'm an academic advisor, but also I've done some work with some colleagues in Evolution Limited, a focused outfit where we focus specifically on thinking about how to adapt in a shifting environment. And through the work that we've done with corporates, we've developed a bit of a framework to help organize things. But let me take things one at a time. And let me start by sharing my screen, if I may. And let's now move to thinking about both winning through ecosystems and a framework that I'd like to briefly cover with you. Now, first of all, what the heck is all of this noise about ecosystems? Well, as quite often in the world of business, it does have to do with the famous follow the money rule. That's when people in business and later in business schools start noticing. So just to take you down a trip down memory lane, consider market capitalization of the 5 biggest players in the world in terms of stock market, the 5 biggest companies. What do you see? Well, in 2000, what you'd expect, the biggest oil company from America, Exxon, the biggest American conglomerate, GE, the biggest European oil firm, Total, big American tech firm, Microsoft, and Citi, the big American bank. If you go to 2011, you see the same thing, but you now have 2 Chinese firms. You have PetroChina and ICBC. Otherwise, similar cast of characters. Something strange happens in 2016, and the companies that you see is Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook. And this has not really changed ever since. And if you go, last time I actually went and measured them in 2019, the same firms, and all of them are platform ecosystem firms. The only thing that has changed is they all grew much bigger, which is kind of interesting because you're like, what the heck is happening? Why is it that all of a sudden we're speaking about big tech? And earlier on today, I just came from a meeting, from a regulatory discussion where we're trying to change the laws about competition. Why? Because some of these guys are getting way too strong. And they're getting strong by building ecosystems. Now, what exactly do we mean? Let me give you one example from a company that failed to be in this list. It could have, but it didn't manage to. This is a quote by Stephen Elop, the CEO of Nokia, who in 2011 said, "Oh my God, the battle of devices has now become a war of ecosystems, which ecosystems include not only hardware and software of the device, what we do, but developers, applications, e-commerce, advertising, search, social applications, and so many other things. Competitors aren't taking a market share for devices. They're taking the market share within an entire ecosystem, which means we're going to have to decide how we either build, catalyze, or join an ecosystem," which is kind of interesting and kind of different. And this is the new way of thinking about ecosystems, that competition more broadly that emerged. And that's what drew me to ecosystems, because as Christoph was saying, up until the time, I was simply looking at how industries change. And then I said, there's these formations that are becoming ever more important. We probably need to figure out exactly how they work. So how do they work? Well, you kind of know that. Many of us lamented the death of BlackBerry. It was really nice. You could type on planes, and unfortunately, they did not work on ecosystems, whereas Apple and other firms were careful about not only doing things themselves, but working with complementers, even if it almost happened by mistake. Now, not everything is an ecosystem. And consider, for instance, phones. If you think about your phone, there are a few things that the phone manufacturer does. That's supply chain. They produce the case, they produce the chip, they produce the screen, they put them all together. They say, hey, here's a phone. This is where the ecosystem starts, because Huawei is not going to tell me how I'm going to be using the phone. However, Google kind of is, because Huawei is part of the Android ecosystem. And the Android ecosystem says, hey, you can take a bag to choose from, but I'm going to tell you who's going to be in the bag or not. I'm going to tell you what the rules of the game are, and I will tell you how this whole thing goes about. And this is where there is this interesting and new level of choice from the customer, who can themselves choose what to use that complements a particular device or product or service. But there is someone else, the orchestrator, who decides who plays in and who doesn't play in. So this is what an ecosystem is, and that's why they are interesting. They are things that you need to put together to make a value proposition, whereby there are different firms that participate and where the customer has choice. Now you could say, okay, all right, so I'm going to put things together. What does that mean? Then I'm going to say hot water, a tea bag, and a cup. I'm going to speak about the tea ecosystem. It's like, come on, it's ridiculous. That's not a tea ecosystem, it's a cup of tea. Everyone knows how to make a cup of tea. Yeah, why? Well, because any tea bag works with any cup, works with any water. But think about what Nestle did. Nestle said, okay, I think that I'm going to create a new way of making coffee. I'm going to call it Nespresso. What is Nespresso? Nespresso is ground coffee that is held in some capsules. These capsules only work with particular machines. These machines need to be co-specialized, and they are customized to work with the capsules. And then it says, okay, so if I have these capsules and I don't want to produce machines, why don't I go to Krups and then say, Krups, rather than me contracting with you and then selling the package to the customer, I'll create an ecosystem. I'll set up the things that work, and you guys produce the machines. Although I'm only going to work with Krups, with Judah, and with another two companies, with Brown and another two companies. I will tell you what prices I want you to have, how you're going to put them together, and then you will be able collectively to do something that makes sense. So I now will succeed, not only because I run things well, but because I manage my ecosystem in an intelligent way. So the difference between the tea example and Nespresso is really the customization and the way these things fit together. Here's the fun trick. In the traditional way of producing things, having such customization is fairly rare and hard to do, i.e. you need a special capsule that is patented to work with a special machine. In the digital economy, this is what is called an API. A programming interface, which means that you see lots of opportunities of doing this more focused, specialized connecting. And you can also connect things that you never thought were possible before. Not everything is an ecosystem. There are some things that we produce fully, that are vertically integrated. For others, we just use suppliers. Others were like, we're going to use the market. But what we see is this growing role of the players that coordinate different activities. And because of digitization, huge force of change, digitization, we're now seeing that we have the possibility of putting different things together, adding innovative value add processes to the customers. You don't simply rely on the open market. Why? Because it's still a little bit tricky. So you need to make sure that everything works together. This is what, in essence, Google via Android offers in the mobile world. Now, when we speak about ecosystems, people say, oh, okay, got it. So we have some big firms like Google and Apple that make sure that everything works together, but they don't produce it all themselves. They also bring others, so they create ecosystems of interdependent firms. So to be successful, you need to be an orchestrator, right? It's like, not necessarily, not always. There are a very few firms that orchestrate, i.e. They create these big ecosystems, these sets of interdependent firms that collaborate together with no central command usually, but some flexible ways of collaborating to add some value. But in addition to that, you have partners. Let me give you one example. One of the most advanced cases of ecosystems are the things that come from China. And we know from China that you have companies like Alibaba, or even more so Tencent, that has WeChat, that create these big ecosystems that do absolutely everything. So if you're a Chinese tourist, you can take WeChat Go Europe, and then you want to see Warsaw, there's an app on your phone. You can observe what are the interesting things in Warsaw. And the way that it works is that KPN, the Dutch telco operator, has sent you a SIM, because Huawei take 2 SIMs, so that you can have your own and the one of the country that you're going in there, so you don't spend any money. But KPN is a partner of Tencent, WeChat, and works with the local attractions to say, give me some discounts and we're going to split part of the value that we create. So in addition to the big guy, the orchestrator, there are partners who say, good, I'll create and I'll manage one part of the ecosystem. And I think that there is lots of opportunities, and too many firms just want to be the orchestrators. And of course, you can be a contributor. You can participate in this ecosystem as a member who offers the services. The simple app developer for Apple, the simple driver for Uber, but quite often people can find cool ways to do in terms of being a partner. Ecosystems rock, and we saw that they add some value. The problem is that unfortunately, many people say, ooh, that means that you need to be an orchestrator. And the answer is not so quickly. I mean, we get this orchestrator envy. Everyone says, I get it. This is a rule for riches. I'll create my own ecosystem. The world doesn't work that way. And when I speak about that, I think about LeBron James. Who's LeBron James? For those of you who understand basket, you know who he is. He's a terrific player. He shoots from 7 meters. Now, the problem that I have is that I see people saying, hey, look at what Google is doing. Hey, look at what Apple is doing. See how much money they make? You should do the same thing. You should create your ecosystem. It's like looking at LeBron James saying, hey, look at LeBron James. See what he's doing? He's shooting from 7 meters. To be successful, shoot from 7 meters. It's silly. You're not going to be successful if you do things that are very difficult. The question is, how can you be successful given from where you start? And quite often, rather than thinking that you will need to create your own ecosystem, what you need to do is to think about what is the right strategy to be successful in ecosystems. Quite often, companies have many different ecosystems. Work with Philips. Philips has a different ecosystem for supporting innovation. They have a delivery ecosystem for collaboration with existing suppliers. They have a platform ecosystem that they are now, especially with COVID-19, trying to push for the digital healthcare partners. I think that you also have different types of ecosystems for different reasons. You have what we call a fixed core ecosystem. What does that mean? That's an ecosystem where you're like, I have a product. I want to get the engagement and energy of others outside so that I don't invest my own assets. And for other people, it's like, there are people who might need me as a complementer. You are an espresso, you have machine manufacturers. You are Apple, you want to have people who will do the creative bit that your own employees might not be able to do. Then you have what we call the customer grab multi-solution ecosystem. What is that? Well, that is, I own the customer already. Why don't I sell them something more? Everyone wants to do that. Uber is now shifting away from only giving you rides to say, I'm going to offer you rides. I'm going to transport your food. I have you now. I'll be able to give you all the needs that you possibly can have. Then there's what platforms give you, which is the transaction ecosystem. On top of Airbnb sit some more specialized services that it offers, but they are all resting on this marketplace. An unusual case but a different, distinct case nonetheless. And finally, you have some ecosystems that are innovation toolkit ecosystems, i.e. they are communities of people who come together to identify new ways of working, where you link them up with new tools. IBM does that, Facebook does that, Google does that. The people in artificial intelligence spend a lot of time doing it. You also have different ecosystems. Some of them are global, like the big tech ecosystems. Others are multi-local. If you have a driving ecosystem, it's one city at a time. Things are very different. So how do you win? Well, you need to think about the entire ecosystem, and you need to think about how you can create a strategy that works on a subgroup with clear needs. To give you one example, in China, everyone knows about Alibaba, the dominant player, the big daddy of Amazon for the Chinese world. There was a second player in e-commerce that was called JD.com. The other big tech firm, Tencent, is an investor on it. However, they have been now pushed aside by another company that is called Duoduo. What the heck is Duoduo? And how did they manage to start pushing away the second player in such a massive market? They said, tell you what, people like experiences. They don't just like shopping because they need to shop. So they have gamified the shopping experience. They have focused on the younger generation, and they give you rewards for different shopping, and they do it in a social way, bringing other people together. So you can receive products for free by successfully forming teams with friends. You create engagement from the Duoduo farm and Duoduo crush, because it was people who are crazy with gaming and said, hey, dude, we're good gamers. Let's bring people in shopping. So by creating this interesting cross-bending, by identifying what the needs are, by changing the way that you interact, you're able to find a new way in which you are able to compete and find ways of adding value by redefining it and by building a challenge that allows you to create a new ecosystem. Now, the problem is that rather than thinking about what the heck do the customers need, and also what is it that the people that I depend on for my success need, the complementers, I tend to think about myself. So when I work with companies, quite often you say, give me your ecosystem. What do? They draw themselves in the middle, big tech around, and somewhere in the distance, maybe other things. It's like, oh, well, I mean, that's an ecosystem, not an ecosystem, which is exactly the wrong way of looking at it. You need to fight for customers and for complementers, and that's what companies from Uber and Google to much smaller companies do. Now, that's the general stuff. But what I'd like to do, especially for those of you who are perhaps a little bit more engaged in that, and who have been involved in ecosystems, is go hardcore. So what I'm now going to do is to focus on a framework which we've developed working with some companies, both in Asia and in Europe, thinking about a more structured way to look at the ecosystem. You've heard the basics. Then the question is, okay, I have a firm. I am facing a change, and I understand that I need diverse partners. I think that I need to have an ecosystem strategy. What the heck do I do? Well, our suggestion is to have a framework that covers 7 steps. What do you do this framework for? Well, it's a tool that helps you figure out what your ecosystem play should be, and it helps you figure out what the story is, what the areas that you need to develop are, and as such, what you need to do in order to succeed. And what you can do is you realize that you can understand the ecosystem of your entire company, and then you can start drilling down, as we've done with a number of the companies, and I may be speaking about that in a moment. What are these 7 steps? Well, 3 of them relate to a company overall. The other 4 focus on what you do one ecosystem at a time. First, you need to understand what the customers are and what value you add. You understand the potential scope of play within the ecosystem. The second is to start mapping the ecosystem competitive landscape, something that I think we're only now starting to understand a little bit better. The third thing is to focus on the role. Remember what I was telling you, whether your role should be that of an orchestrator, of a partner, or of a complementer, and you can do that systematically. Now, once you've understood, okay, where am I playing? What is the ecosystem? Or potentially, what are the different ecosystems I need to be involved in? Because quite often you have more than one. As I showed you in the example of Philips, say, okay, got it. I've got 3 or 4 key ecosystems, and that's how I need to connect them. Now, let me map them out, and for each of them, much in the same way that you'd say a company has a business a corporate strategy, what it wants over the role, and then it has different business units. And for the business units, it has a strategy. It is for each of the specific ecosystems, you start drilling down and you go to the circle, looking at the value proposition, at the part that you have, and the analysis of how your specific ecosystem adds value, the nature of the partnering strategies that you get, which may differ depending on whether we decided, hey, it makes sense for you to be an orchestrator versus, hey, it makes sense for you to be a partner. And then how do you implement it? How do you run and govern the ecosystem, especially if you are the one that runs it? And finally, what is the case for investment? This is something that I think organizations often forget, because you are engaging in an ecosystem, not because it's only sexy and other rich people do it. You do that because you expect some benefits. And I think that you need to start articulating what these benefits are and how they are relevant for you. The first thing that you need to do is really, really get the customer. If the ecosystem shows us something, it is that the customers are getting an increasing amount of choice. And the ecosystems, the groups of firms that come together to respond to their needs, are precisely these groupings that are going to find a new way of making a customer happy. So you need to understand your end user or key stakeholder, their pain points, their expectations, their frustrations, the wants, the needs, hopes, and dreams, the things that you need to do. And as you do that, you understand by a customer-centric approach what are the different needs and how you can put them together. You then say, okay, it may be that for some of these needs, an ecosystem could deliver value. Now, for others, perhaps one is not needed. Perhaps you're going to say, yeah, well, for traditional products, you can just rely on the supply chain or organizations doing it all themselves. But for some, they're going to say, well, you know, I may need to find ways of partnering with other companies that are able to add value. And then you're like, okay, so now I'm dealing with a situation where there needs to be partnering. That's where you start peeling the analytics and then saying, how will that work? Well, if the business ecosystem is the right choice, and I know what the customer does, what kind of ecosystem am I speaking about? And that's where we have seen a fair amount of confusion in some of the organizations we work with, because the strategies that you need if you want to develop a good fixed core ecosystem is going to be different from one where you have a customer grab or a multi-solution ecosystem. That's where you decide what is the nature of your value add, and then you create the stakeholder assessment that allows you to understand what are the maps of the different parties that need to come together to serve the final customer. The more technology becomes focused and specialized, and the more digital connections allow you to reconfigure what the customer sees, the more complicated this picture becomes. But I think it is very useful to think about not only your end customers, but to the other actors that complement. Now, once you've done that, and you're like, there's a great opportunity here if I combine with other players, you should then step back and then say, okay, so let me now think, how can I add value compared to the alternatives? Let me give you one specific example. Think about Huawei. President Trump doesn't like Huawei. So what he said is, you ain't going to be working with American companies. Now, one of the challenges is that Huawei said, I make phones. I'm happy to work with an American company, Google, that owns Android, that creates the universe that makes my phone usable. And now they're being told, you're not going to be able to use it. And they're like, oh my God, what do I do? Do I go with another ecosystem? Do I create a new ecosystem? What are the strengths and weaknesses? So for instance, they or anyone else that faces a choice, whether the choice is, do I create or do I make one, or which one do I join? If you're not big and strong enough, you need to do a competitive ecosystem analysis and figure out what are the pros and cons of the different ecosystems, or even the different solutions that exist. And then you figure out where you can move in or not. And then you start moving to the more interesting bits in terms of the competitive dynamics of ecosystems, because although people think that every ecosystem is protected by network effects and very significant economies of scale, that's actually not true. What's the story there? Well, the story is that if there is someone who's created this network of relationships, they will keep it because the network is there, and then people won't want to start some rival option. Sometimes that's true, sometimes that's not. And I think that it's useful for us to start looking at when this happens and when it doesn't. Then there's some more work that I won't have much time to speak about, which says that you've got tactics when you are competing against an existing ecosystem head to head, versus when you try to envelop it by growing it or doing the opposite, to unbundle. So you have to do a bit of work, a bit of mapping, a bit of competitive ecosystem analysis that allows you to understand how the landscape looks like, what is defensible and what is not, and how you can address and challenge that. Once you understand that, once you know what this looks like and you've done the underlying analytic work, then you've got to start thinking about your role. First of all, you're going to run this thing, you're going to be a partner, or are you going to be a complementer? If you're running it, are you going to be running it yourself? Are you going to be sharing the ownership, or are you going to be creating a joint venture and federation? Also, if you are, if you don't own it, if you just want to participate, and you saying, this are the ecosystems that I'm going to participate in, what are the criteria by which you start deciding in which ecosystem you're going to be participating in? Then you've decided that, and you're like, okay, let me now move to the next part, which is, I understand where I need to play. Give me now each specific ecosystem. Now, once you start focusing on ecosystem, you're like, great, I will be able to start by having a specific target, a target group, geography, global or local, target set of needs. And for them, I'm going to be using end user friction evaluation. What are the things that work and don't work? And then you start thinking about not only the customer requirements, but also the other stakeholder needs, desires, and interests. And once you've done that, the next stage is to say, okay, I know what I want to get. I know who the right, what it is in terms of the requirements that I have to bring partners, and I'm going to build an ecosystem. But what do I need to make that happen? That's another important area, and one where we're doing quite a bit of research now to say, what are the organizational structures that are going to be effective if you want to start going outside? Now, for organizations that are established, this is seriously difficult stuff. The reason is that they're used in doing most things themselves. They're not used to engaging with multiple participants and being responsive and adjusting to the real world around them. So you need to start thinking about the skills that you need technically, technologically, things like APIs and SDKs and IDEs and things that may sound very geeky, but are absolutely essential in many of these digital relationships. But also to think about whether you have the right skills, the right people that are focused in understanding the co-development of outsiders, rather than thinking that any relationship that has to do with the outside is a relationship where the buyer squeezes a supplier, or where a supplier tries to find better conditions from the buyer. You also should think about how you can create some joint value by finding greater sense of alignment with your ecosystem partners. And that's the next bit of work, of thinking about how you will be creating a sense of community, the way that you engage with partners, or if you're a partner, the way that you create what we call fractal ecosystems, those that sit underneath the partner to make that work. And you have to work on things that are as basic as the trust and governance plan of the ecosystem themselves. So you need to think about how you will get customers and partners trust, and quite often government trust. And you need to think about the ways that you can either manage, if it's yours, or respond to all the things that come up, because it's fun to say, hey, I have an ecosystem. You need to know how you're going to run it. In order to do that, you need to allocate participation, ownership, and decision rights. That requires a bit of prep work, the revenue management, the way that it works, and having a template to manage the conflict management that comes up in this direction. That you can also do by doing some benchmarking. And what we've seen working organizations that have their own ecosystems is they're starting to benchmark ecosystem health around in terms of the different things that they do, and how open or closed they are, what is their monetization method, in which way they are finding ways of not only making this financially viable themselves, but also financially viable for their partners. And finally, you should know what the heck you are after. You're going to say, not only do I know what the ecosystem is and how it's going to be put together, but I must know why I'm doing it at the end of the day. Am I doing it to cross-sell or upsell the products, to license my products, to reduce my cost, to obtain data for new services, to increase the goodwill and market perception? And by the way, what are the costs? How does that cannibalize from my existing business? What is the cost increase? What are the investments required? And I think that brings you to the investment case itself. So my sense is that you need to move beyond the general appreciation that, hey, the world is changing, ecosystems are important. And you need to start being a little bit more disciplined in thinking about how these things can add value. You start at the level of the overall company, where you understand the ecosystem dynamics and where you should play. You think about the ecosystem competitive landscape. You analyze the role that the firm should play and what its strategic approach is. And that gives you a sense of the overall. And then you start drilling down. And I showed you the high level sort of work packages, as it were. You then can organize information in more specific tools, hopefully in about a year or so. Some of these will be clearer in a book that's going to be coming out. But then that you're looking at what are the specific value that you bring from the ecosystem, understanding the nature of the ecosystem that you have, understanding the nature of your positioning of the user needs, and so on and so forth, focusing on whom you want to partner with and how you can attract them, another separate piece of work. What are the capabilities that you need to ensure that you make that happen, how you should run and govern the ecosystem, and what the case of the ecosystem is. And I think that the bottom line is that in order to be serious, you need to not only address the questions, and we thought that these are the key 7 questions that you need to ask yourselves, but you need to have answers that address each of these different bits of pieces. Now, of course, that's not going to give you just a static picture. That's going to give you a sense of what the landscape is, also a sense of the information, but it helps by providing a grid that can guide your ecosystem strategy, help you understand what happens outside, what you're good doing inside, what are your gaps, and as a result, what it is that you need to do, which is part of the stuff that we've had fun working on with companies that develop their ecosystems in Evolution Limited. So that's been my overview of the conceptual, and then I thought that I'd link it, since I know that you have a number of people who are on the operating side with a slightly more applied in terms of the more engaged work, and I hope that it has been interesting and thought-provoking.
Michael, thank you very much for a very insightful lecture, and it's probably the start of the most interesting part of this evening, because we have a number of questions. They are popping up in Q&A and in the chat. For all the participants, I would warmly encourage you to ask your questions by using the Q&A button. So when you look into the Zoom interface, there is an option, not chat, but a specific button that you press to ask questions. And let me maybe start with one of those questions that we've already received. So Rafał Dudkowski asked about competition between ecosystems that originate in the US and in China. So why wouldn't we want to join ecosystems of TikTok, Xiaomi, or Huawei instead of Apple, Amazon, or the other players?
So that's such a fascinating and multifaceted question. So first of all, there are some ecosystems that are global, and there are others that are local, and that some of the global have sort of nested ecosystems within them. The first answer is, I think that Europe will soon enough realize that whether it likes it or not, it is not just dependent on the US, it is between the US and China. And for better and for worse, there is a technology war, and for all of the desires of the Europeans to create their own giants, we are sadly lagging. We don't have the scale. We don't necessarily have the ambition, the way that things look, and also the regulations that are really good in protecting our civil liberties have made things a little bit more complicated for us. So I think that we will need to not only engage with Apple and Google, but also engage with China. Now, what is a little bit more complicated is what's going to happen with the trade war. President Trump has set off, and he nearly wanted to finish it, but COVID reversed his plans. And while we were thinking that we're heading to an easing off of the trade war, things started erupting again, because he needs to show himself to be stronger. So that means that there is now a greater tension between China and Europe and the US, and China is flexing its muscles. I see Europe changing its tune. I think that up until recently, it was trying to accommodate a little bit. I think that Europe is now increasingly concerned that it does not have any key ecosystem player, and ecosystems will create both webs of connected participants, but also, and that's another topic I didn't cover in today's talk, it enhances your ability to learn from more and more people, which is what AI thrives on. So it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy whereby AI makes one ecosystem better able to figure out what the customers want, makes them better and better and better. What should you do? You should play absolutely not just with Apple and Google. You should consider Tencent and WeChat and Alibaba, and even Huawei is now working with particular companies in European countries, despite the pushback of the Americans. I think.
And by the way, I'm not sure if you realize, but Huawei has R&D development centers, so software development.
Massive.
Huawei platform is in Warsaw, so it's actually
massive.
Very well connected in the
local. Yeah. But that's exactly what I'm saying. That they have realized we have lost the American market. Forget it. We're going to try to see how we work locally. They have identified the key developers, and they're investing super heavily. And they want to make inroads, and they have tried to attract people from European universities and so on and so forth. I also think for people who haven't been in China, if there is a perception that China, that this is the low-cost labor, just spend a few days in Shenzhen in some of the top firms. You're going to have a very different view. You compare Shenzhen with Hong Kong. Hong Kong used to be the big city and Shenzhen the small port. Right now, Shenzhen feels much fancier, much more polished, and much more technologically advanced from Hong Kong, like an order of magnitude. You go to the Ping An Tower and you just get wowed. So I think we're living in an interesting world. I think that China will become an increasingly big part of the reality, including of the ecosystems we need to engage with.
So Michael, thanks for the answer. Just maybe one further comment. You mentioned that there are no examples of EU-based ecosystems. But
no, I would say there are. Let me be accurate, because otherwise I am a proud card-carrying member of the EU. So I should make sure that I qualify that. Not to the scale of the big American and Chinese firms, and I think that certainly for Strager, the competition commissioner, but also you have the commissioner van der Leyen, who wants to see much more of that. So I think that there is a big desire in Europe to play more, and there are some big players that are trying to change their ecosystem strategy. SAP, that had a rather boring ecosystem strategy, is in the process of updating it and thinking about how it will create a more vibrant community, partly because it was challenged by Salesforce.com, an American firm that, because it had a more effective ecosystem strategy, became better. There is a number of others that are trying, Bosch is trying to move into an agriculture ecosystem, BASF as well. So you have a number of industrial companies, and they also are coming together. There's an effort called Gaia X now that is supported by German industry and a number of other Europeans that want to have some platforms. There is another effort which will be more Europe friendly in terms of the mobile data, my data space. I think that the data regulations can have an important role, and Europe has some smaller, not necessarily as big ones. But sorry, Christoph, I didn't want to forestall the question. I want to say that it's a bit of a subtler answer, but go ahead.
I guess it could nicely be linked to another question that we've received, because people are curious about, potential for starting ecosystems in Poland. And maybe I will pop up an example. I'm not sure if you know a company called CD Projekt, which is a game developer behind the famous game Witcher. And, they've actually established own ecosystem that is, of course, well known by people who are familiar with the game industry. But that's probably one example of a huge network of complementers that could work together, and somebody is behind the orchestration of this network.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, let me just understand what the question is. I agree that this is interesting. The question is whether in Poland you could create more of them. So the answer is yes. If you go back to the framework that I gave you, there are some ecosystems that may be local or multi-local or or that can work at the national level. There are some things where either the market or the regulation is very local. Transport, it's local. I mean, even if Uber says I'm a global brand, it needs to have drivers with their own systems and people who know that. And you can see local firms that are developing a strong solution. Yandex is an example in Russia. And what Yandex did is that it focused on a particular set of needs, and then it broadened more and more once it got a toehold. So the interesting thing about that is that there is the possibility of becoming dominant in a market that may be a little bit more local or more regional, perhaps more national, because of regulation. So you create, something which is around fintech or, other innovations. And then once you have enough of a position, you then pivot and your ecosystem changes. It used to be an ecosystem that might have been fixed core, and then you get a number of customers, and then you're like, now I'll turn it into a customer grab. I have the customer, I will expand onto more lines of business. But you start where you think it is defendable, i.e., where the people that you bring together the customers and the other complementers that you have are people who care about competition at the local level. And I'm sure that there are going to be a number of interesting focus opportunities in that regard.
Excellent. Thank you. So moving on, Piotr was asking a question about examples of successful ecosystems in food retail sector. I guess you already mentioned some e-shopping platforms, but maybe it could be broadened to also brick and mortar or more traditional businesses.
Well, I would say that it goes even more than that, because think about for instance what Gwyneth Paltrow did with Goop, and that involves and has enveloped partly food. I mean, people like to be guided in terms of lifestyle. What Gwyneth Paltrow did with Goop is to say that she's a well-known actress, and she has found ways of saying, I'm going to do healthy recipes and then sell lots of overpriced stuff in terms of food and clothing, and then created the link to some customers and then brought some firms to work with her. So I think that you see an increasing amount of engaged players that are providing more lifestyle-like solutions, who don't say, hey, I have a farm, I have my products to sell, or I have cows, I have my cheese to sell. Like, let me see who are the right kind of producers so that I can find the customers and sell them a nice package, and I'm not even going to have the cost of carrying this as inventory. I'm going to orchestrate an ecosystem of people who complement me, and I'm going to do some cool ways of delivering it digitally. As we are increasingly sophisticated in what we eat and how we eat, I think that these things are growing in importance. And if you want to look at evidence from that, look, for instance, at what is happening with the prepared meal market, right? There's all these big companies, certainly I know the ones that exist in the UK, and I know that a number of them are in continental Europe as well, that come up with recipes and do the packaging and work with a small number of suppliers. So this helps take, not just say, I will digitize delivery of food, but I will rethink how I add value. I will find my complementers and I will engage them, whether it is to distribute fruit and vegetables or to do the mindful chef kind of thing, where you put everything together in a package and you say, hey, person, a combination of a cool new recipe and already dosed things out, or if you do other varietals. So, but I think that we have seen quite a bit of innovation, and I think that there is yet more scope for innovation.
Thanks very much. So moving on, one of more, I would say, difficult questions now is about the relations between ecosystems and clusters. So Maciek and another participant is asking about the actual relations between those two concepts, and maybe clusters develop into ecosystems once something happens to them. What's your view on this?
Well, look, when we speak about ecosystems, there are ecosystems of a number of firms that all together work for a specific product. The different participants of Mindful Chef recipes, those that participate in the Google ecosystem, wherever they're located, and they are bound together because they are, if something that one sells works, everyone else benefits, and vice versa. There is a separate part which has to do with geography. In geographies, usually we speak of ecosystems, but a little bit more poetically, I would say, in a broad sense, in the sense that, well, we all consume some similar resources and we all live in the same area. It's closer to this biological concept of ecosystems, which, some of us have tried to shift away from as a definition. So I think that clusters have a different dynamic in as much as the only thing that brings them together is geography. On the other hand, clusters can give rise to ecosystems in the narrower way that I would define them, in the sense that if you are together with actors, you're going to say, hey guys, is there any way in which we can combine and together we offer something to the customer? So the ecosystem in terms of I was having my latte and I saw a cool venture capitalist, I was having a nice beer, and I spoke to this regulator or this customer. This to me is slightly different. It's very useful, but the ecosystems, the way that I define them, are organizations that come together for something which is a little bit more intentional. Some of the clusters that are successful also facilitate the development of these digital ecosystems, but not always. And then there are some digital ecosystems that can get born even without the clusters, which is kind of the first question you asked me. What about playing with TikTok versus Google? One's in China, the other one's America, and you can be in Krakow, but you can participate.
Thanks. And also maybe trying to build up on this on the answer about clusters to Maciek and to other participants asking the question. Remember that what Michael presented also revealed the role for suppliers who are maybe not members of the ecosystem per se, because they supply the company that is playing in the specific ecosystem. So that they might not be specifically members of the ecosystem, but they are still members of the cluster because they supply components or materials necessary for certain product. And maybe one more question, this time from myself, because we are using software that is provided by Zoom, and it's quite a visible case of a player that does not want to play with existing ecosystems. So Zoom is heading a one-man battle against Microsoft, Google, nowadays also Facebook, and several other players that try to develop video conferencing functionalities as part of the ecosystem. And of course, they hate Zoom, and they use all possible resources to eliminate the player from the market. So what do you think should Zoom do? Should they build their own ecosystem? Should they join forces with some of the global players? Or maybe there are some other options?
Well, I mean, this is a bit hard to say because it depends on what their ambition is. And clearly, one of the challenges has been that any player that has been technologically good has been a candidate for being purchased by one of the big tech players. It's almost a strategy that many of the tech players have created to see how they can monetize their advantage by making themselves available as things that can be used to support the existing big players. And WhatsApp and Skype are good examples of massively expensive acquisitions that have emerged because people said, well, don't go alone. But it has to do with what the people who run these firms want to do. If they want to cash out, I think they're in a very good position to cash out. Is this the game? I honestly don't know. It is not a case that I have looked at. They don't seem to want themselves to do much more than right now becoming quite strong in this vertical. I would have expected something a little bit bolder, but without knowing the whys and the hows of their strategy, I'm a little hesitant to give you a straight answer because, it may be cleverer than you and I know.
Question from the audience coming from Facebook. The role of the state in ecosystems, so regulation, state intervention, can the governments do something good or bad to to the ecosystem?
Well, I think that the governments will do something, whether it's good or bad, they will do something. And I think that we are seeing the growth of a new type of power. Yeah, literally the previous Zoom call that I had before, actually, no, it was WebEx, was before that was with the Competition Commission, where we were discussing ways of regulating platforms and ecosystems. There was a big meeting that I organized together with the World Economic Forum in London the end of February. And I think a number of the heads of the European competition authorities were there. And I think that if you ask them, they would all say, yes, our existing tools are not very well adjusted to that. Why? We tend to think about dominance by saying one market at a time, percentage of the market, and you pushing the price up. Amazon does not want to push the price up now. It does not have a big percentage now. But the problem is that this is what has allowed it to squash a number of the players that came with it. It also says, come to my platform and have your products. But when I smell an interesting trend, I may be able to reserve the right to totally squash you. So you see, there are new types of problems that emerge, and we know that we need to address them. There is a lot of work that is currently going on to think about how we will change our regulatory framework for platforms and ecosystems. Having literally spent the last 4 hours this afternoon speaking with lawyers on antitrust and regulation, I can tell you it's going to be hard work. And it's hard work because we had created an analytical apparatus that was based on a description of the economy that is different from the one that we have today. The way that power is exercised is different, is new, and I think that we need to adjust. Do I think it's going to happen immediately? No. Do I think that there is a valuable role for regulation? Yes. Actually, even the big players themselves right now, the big tech say, yeah, perhaps we should be regulated because they are afraid that things are going to get so dicey, they're going to be poorly regulated. So expect a number of things. And I think, to me, by far the most interesting aspect, and that's one of the things I'm going to be spending my summer researching on, is the role of data and data regulation. If we start deciding that we will not allow a company to use data about the customer, for instance, what I buy in Amazon for the healthcare needs that I have, because Amazon could say, oh, Michael, you're eating so much chocolate, so much butter, I know what you need in terms of healthcare. And I say, oh, well, thank you very much. That's a very good idea. Or I could say, you know what? I'm not sure that I want you to know that. And I'm not sure that I want you to act on this. So there are some questions on the monetization of data and how that is going to be resolved within ecosystems. That is going to affect many, many ways in which people are making money. You see, one of the fun things is that regulation can affect in fairly profound ways the way that business models exist and people make money. And I think that we may see some both good and unintended consequences of regulation, depending on whether we do it carefully or whether we do it sloppily.
Michael, so thanks very much for all the answers so far. And last, final question, which is very visionary, and let's see how you react to this, because participants are trying to find out what are the future sectors in which we don't see ecosystems yet, but there might be potential for this. And
healthcare.
What about food?
Food, yes. I mean, healthcare, I think, is the one where we are expecting regulation to play an important role. Also, COVID is making it clear that healthcare is a mess, and we need to integrate digital with non-digital and wellness with healthcare and change the separation. Wellness, which includes food and lifestyle, is other areas where I think you're going to see that. And I think there's going to be a much more fluid way of organizing things in the B2B sector, because not only B2C, but I think that you're going to see groupings of smaller firms or individual contractors that compete And this is going to partly be the result of the shock to the system that we have seen through COVID. So I do expect there's going to be some really interesting years ahead. So,
and I guess Bartosz would be very excited if you also mentioned space sector, but what's your view on this?
Of course, yes. But okay, sirs, professors, thank you very much for a great presentation. It was really very interesting and really great. Professor Krzysztof, thank you for great moderation. I know that this evening was very interesting, especially for people, for more than 150 being with us. So great job, I would like to say, for everybody. And now I would like to ask Claudia how your job looks like. And I would like to remind to everybody that we are waiting for your donation. Be sure everybody will have a link with donation address, and we hope that we can help and we can make some good for Greece now. Claudia, could you show us your work?
Yes, I'm just doing it now. So give me 1 second. I will later on. I will also add the full link to the work so that we have it once having work published or exported first and then published. So the link will be here. All right. And Michael, I want to thank you. Your presentation and then the section with questions was well extremely filled with the information, and my mind actually really tired at that time, was well blown, almost literally. So I wish I could grab everything as we were joking in the beginning, but I didn't. But it wasn't really possible. So thank
Excellent.
you again, and as I said, it's going to be finished with the donation link here, and we will share it through the social media. And of course, you are welcome to use it anywhere you want, because these are
Thank you. I look forward to receiving it. It's been fun speaking with you guys. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful night. Have a great drink to unblow your head. Donate liberally. Thanks for speaking with you. Have a great night, guys.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you very much. We are proud.
Thank you.
You were with us. Paweł, are you there?
Tak, już jestem.
Paweł is outside. Paweł, could you tell us about next meeting?
Next meeting will be with Tal Kartam, accelerator guru from Israel, and this webinar will be at Thursday. No.
Yeah. Yeah. No Thursday.
Thursday is tomorrow.
Tuesday.
Yeah, next week.
Tuesday. Yeah, next Tuesday.
Tuesday.
At 2 p.m.
Yeah, it's somehow of experiment, because every time we have meeting in the evening. So we hope. And now I would like to show the film with music. I hope it will work. Now we'll see if yes or not. Please be a little time with us, and please write on chat if the music is already or not. So thank you very much, and see you on Tuesday. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Czyli proszę Państwa, jeszcze raz gorąco prosimy, rozważcie możliwość złożenia donacji do Fundacji Jest, Artemis, bo jak rozumiem Michael zgodził się uczestniczyć w naszym spotkaniu nieodpłatnie, co się, jak rozumiem, zdarza dosyć rzadko, licząc na to, że grecka organizacja otrzyma trochę wsparcia również od Polaków.
Profesorze, to prawda, to się zdarza rzadko, ale nam się udało 15 razy do tej pory. Natomiast oczywiście chcemy czynić dobro i to jest to, co możemy robić. Dziękujemy, szanowni Państwo, że byliście z nami. Profesorze, dziękuję za świetną, absolutnie znakomitą moderację. Klaudia, dziękuję za świetne rysowanie. A Wam, szanowni Państwo, życzymy udanego wieczoru i dziękujemy za świetne pytania. Do zobaczenia.
No i dziękujemy wszystkim Państwu za interesujące pytania.
Do zobaczenia.